Greetings, Richard Fulmer here, and welcome to another Richard's Rock Rambles, episode number 100. Who would have thought, eh? I've made it to 100. Geez, where's the time gone? It seems like just yesterday I was doing my very first video, which I think was Leonard Skinner, if memory serves. Yep, and that was about a year and a bit ago, so time doesn't stand still. But it's been great, and hopefully there'll be another 100. So we've been looking at bands' second albums. So I thought what I'd do today is have a look at I've done Led Zeppelin, it's probably my favorite band. So now I'm going to do Black Sabbath, my second favorite band. And they were also really prolific in the 70s. Their first album came out in 1970, and the second. So very much like Led Zeppelin, 2 albums in 1 year, Sabbath did the same thing. Their debut album was a very quick recording. I don't think it took them longer than a couple of weeks. Very low budget. It made quite an impact. It was quite heavy for the time. Probably scared a few people even. But their second album would be the one that really took them off. They would have some great tracks on that album which would become classics. In particular, the title track, Paranoid. That's what we're talking about today, the second Black Sabbath album. So this album was recorded at the Regent Sound Studios in London between the 16th and the 21st of June 1970. And it was released on the 18th of September in 1970 in the UK, and on the 7th of January 1971 in the US, so the year after. It was quite a gap between the two release dates. I think it was because it was on 2 different labels. So it was on the Vertigo label, and in fact, if you still have the vinyl with that proper Vertigo label in the middle, it's worth quite a bit. I would hang on to that. And it was produced by Roger Bain, who I think was in the first album and would work with them later on as well. So who was in the band? Of course, Ozzy Osbourne was there on vocals. I think he may have played a bit of harmonica on this album as well. I know he played on the first one. Tony Iommi was there on guitar, the great Tony Iommi, the riffmeister. And he also played flute on the track Planet Caravan. Geezer Butler was there on bass, Bill Ward on drums, and congas on Planet Caravan. So he was doing a bit of percussion work as well. The album was engineered by Tom Allen, who also played a bit of piano on Planet Caravan. So everybody got involved. Tom Allen, excuse me. Let me have a sip of water. That might help. Tom Allen might be a name that you recognize. He would go on to do a lot of production work for Judas Priest. In fact, he would be the producer on some of their pretty big albums like Screaming for Vengeance, Point of Entry, and a few others as well. So the album went to number 1 in the UK charts in 1970 and number 2 in the US charts in 1971. And it's gone 4 times platinum in the States. So it's a pretty big album. I have to be honest and say that it's not my favorite Black Sabbath. My favorite Black Sabbath would come a few releases later, and that would be Volume 4. That's my favorite. But for its time and what it was, Paranoid was a good album. So initially, the album was not going to be called Paranoid. It was going to be called War Pigs, which ended up being one of the tracks on the album. But the record company thought, no, it's a bit too close to the bone. And at the time, Vietnam was happening. That the Americans were at war in Vietnam. So they thought, no, it's a bit un-PC. So they changed the title to Paranoid. And the track Paranoid, in fact, was a last-minute addition to the album, and they just knocked it off quickly, and lo and behold, it became that huge hit, one which many aspiring rock guitarists have had to learn that riff, very much like Deep Purple's Smoke on the Water and Whole Lot of Love by Led Zeppelin. So let's just go back to the first album. That was the first album, just called Black Sabbath, and this was a pretty big thing for its time. I mean, the title track was big, The Wizard, Behind the Wall of Sleep, NIB, Evil Woman, Sleeping Village, The Warning, and Wicked World. But it didn't really do much in the way of sales. It just got them known. This is us, this is Black Sabbath. And then along came Paranoid. with that really crappy cover. I mean, for me, that's probably one of the worst Black Sabbath covers. I mean, this guy with a sword in his hand. And the reason for that is, so their album was originally going to be called War Pigs. So this was going to be the cover, and it makes sense. There's a guy with a sword, war. And of course, the record company said, no, change it to Paranoid. And that's got nothing to do with Paranoid. What's a guy with a sword running at you got to do with Paranoid? But anyway, so the band wasn't really happy with the cover. I think the only worse cover than this for Black Sabbath would be many years later, Dehumanizer, when Ronnie James Dio came out. That's a terrible cover as well. But anyway, bad covers notwithstanding, it's a great album. Starts off with War Pigs. Slow, ponderous Black Sabbath with a typical Tony Iommi riff that just blows you away. All about war, the futility of war, who's in charge of war. Very interesting lyrics. Most of the lyrics in the early days, in fact, right throughout the Aussie years, were done by Geezer Butler and beyond, I think, as well. So that was War Pigs. It was a fairly long track. Like I said, some great riffs, great drumming from Bill Ward, upfront bass from Geezer Butler as per usual, and the great vocals of Ozzy Osbourne. Back in the day, in the 70s, Ozzy's voice was still strong. Then came Paranoid, that throwaway track I mentioned, second track, and that would become the huge hit. I think there was a music video done for it as well. You can catch that on YouTube. There's a few of them. Planet Caravan was the next track. That was that sort of spacey track. There was a track on 13, the album that they did with Ozzy, the reunion album, which came out a few years back. And there was a track on there called Zeitgeist. And that's almost like the companion piece to Planet Caravan. Very trippy, flute played here by Tony Iommi. Very druggy kind of track, I suppose, for the time it would have been. But just an interesting, it's not the usual pounding Black Sabbath, but it's a nice break in between. So speaking of pounding tracks, then you get Iron Man, which was another big hit from this album and would go on to be a crowd favorite. Sorry, it's very early in the morning here. It's getting pretty chilly here as well. Winter is on its way. Then there's a track, Electric Funeral. Also, quite a different time changes to that song. Interesting track. Some great drumming on this album from Bill Ward. Hand of Doom, Rat Salad, and Fairies Wear Boots. Fairies Wear Boots would be the other hit track that came off this album, Paranoid. So Fairies Wear Boots, Iron Man, Paranoid, and War Pigs were the tracks that sort of were taken as singles off this album. Did pretty well, but I think over the years it's grown and grown. It's also had the deluxe treatment. I don't have a deluxe version of this album. I will be getting that one day. But, I'm not one of these guys who keeps buying the same album. Or, really. The only one I would think about getting the deluxe treatment for is Volume 4, which has recently been released in that lovely box set. So let's see if there's anything I can show you on the inside. This is a remastered version. So that's just the story. I don't know if you can see much there. There's a guy standing in the field or whatever. Here's the lyrics. And that's the photograph that was on the original inside gatefold sleeve of the vinyl. There's Ozzy standing to one side, which are almost prophetic, really. There he is to one side, and he would be the first to leave the band. But this was still in the early days when everybody was still buddies and the drugs hadn't quite taken over yet. That would come later. And there's some more lyrics. And there's a great shot of Ozzy and Tony Iommi playing that very early red Gibson SG. I think he's played SGs pretty much his whole career. Apart from playing a Strat for a while, I think if you watched it at Rock and Roll Circus from Jethro Tull, when he was briefly in Jethro Tull, you can see him playing a Strat there. But otherwise, he's an SG man. So there we have it, Black Sabbath's Paranoid. A classic, as I say, not my favorite Black Sabbath, but definitely one of the great early ones, and some standout tracks on here. And I'm sure most people have heard that title track, Paranoid. It's a staple. So there we go. Next time around, we're going to have a look at the second album from that great Canadian band, Rush, Fly By Night. Also, First album didn't do much. Second album, that's when they started to find their feet. So before I leave, I would just like to say thank you to everybody who's tuned into the channel, everybody who's subscribed and put up with me for these 100 episodes. Thank you guys, I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. Even if you've only watched 1 or 2 videos, thank you so much. Any comments that you have given, always appreciated. Either way, good or bad, I can take it. And it's just great that people get involved. You know, it shows that somebody's out there watching you, which is great, and that's why I do it. And the main thing for this channel was just to, you know, make people interested in rock, albums that you may not have heard before or get back into. There's always that as well. So thank you guys. You know who you are, my loyal supporters for Club Richard's Rock Rambles. And yeah, like I said, hopefully there'll be another hundreds coming up. And we'll catch you again soon for some Rush. Take it easy out there. Have a great week. I'll catch you soon. Cheers.